Imagine a world where a single thought is a death sentence. What happens when belief becomes a crime? What happens when a soul is punished not for harming others, but for dreaming differently about God? For centuries, this wasn't a philosophical question. It was a cold, hard reality. Across the long arc of Christian history, countless believers were branded heretics. They didn't reject Jesus. They simply saw him through a lens the powerful refused to permit. Their stories reveal how fear, control, and human frailty slowly choked a faith originally built on love. The word heresy sounds like a curse, but it stems from an ancient Greek word meaning choice. In the dawn of Christianity, the air was thick with ideas. Believers debated openly, who was Jesus? How does salvation work? How should we gather? These clashes were electric, passionate, and raw. But they were seen as the growing pains of a living faith. Back then, holding a different perspective didn't make you an enemy. It made you a seeker. But as the church grew from a small flame into a massive engine of organization, that openness began to evaporate. Leaders grew terrified that a wildfire of ideas would lead to chaos. They traded the messiness of growth for the safety of walls. Over time, official doctrines were chiseled into stone as truth, and anything outside those lines was cast into the dark. Once that boundary was drawn, heresy wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a contagion, a threat, a treason. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to surveillance, where every prayer was scrutinized for hidden deviations. The hunt for heretics usually began in the shadows, a whisper over a garden fence, a neighbor reporting a strange phrase overheard at dinner, a local priest eyeing a rival who preached with too much innovation. Sometimes kings fueled the fire, using accusations to decapitate political rivals or tighten their iron grip on the throne. Evidence? It was often as thin as smoke. A rumor, a sentence stripped of its context, or a manuscript written in a tongue the accusers didn't speak was enough to seal a fate. In this world of suspicion, your closest friend could unintentionally become your executioner. Yet, most of these hunters weren't monsters. They were terrified men. They truly believed that false ideas could rot the fabric of society. They feared that a single dissenting voice would invite the wrath of God or trigger a national apocalypse. Driven by this paralyzing fear, they justified the most brutal actions as mercy for the greater good. To save the soul, they felt they had to break the person. For much of human history, the cross and the crown were welded together. Religious leaders dictated the laws, and soldiers enforced them. This meant that questioning a sermon wasn't just a theological debate. It was a felony against the state. Heresy became a high crime. To challenge a doctrine was to spit in the face of the king and the creator alike. One of the most silent, soul-crushing punishments was exile. The accused were ripped from their homes, their children, and their history. In an instant, they lost their status, their land, and their identity. Exile was a way to erase a person without spilling blood, removing their influence by casting them into the wilderness. It was a quiet execution of the life they knew. To be sent away meant wandering into the unknown with nothing but the clothes on your back and the crushing weight of never again. Then there were the dungeons. Heretics were frequently buried alive in stone cells for years. These places were damp, freezing, and utterly silent. There were no fair trials, no lawyers, no sunlight. The goal wasn't justice. It was a war of attrition against the mind. Prisoners were promised the sun and the sky if they would only stand in the square and admit they were wrong. Some broke under the weight of the loneliness. Others sat in the dark for a lifetime, refusing to lie about what their hearts knew to be true. They became ghosts, haunting the very institutions they once loved. Beyond the chains, there was a psychological torture that cut even deeper: the total loss of community. To be labeled a heretic was to become a ghost while still breathing. Friends were commanded to forget your name. Family members were forced to turn their backs or face the same fate. In an era where survival depended on your neighbor's help, this social execution was a death blow. To be shunned was to become invisible, a pariah in your own streets. This atmosphere of suspicion did something tragic to Christianity itself. People stopped asking. They buried their curiosity and locked their thoughts behind tight lips. Many believers hid their doubts like stolen goods, terrified of the wrong word. Faith, once an exploration of the infinite, became a fortress to be guarded. Obedience became the only currency, and understanding was traded for safety. The vibrant tapestry of thought was flattened into a single, gray line of forced agreement. Ironically, the very fear used to protect the faith ended up hollowing it out. Christianity speaks of grace, humility, and the radical power of forgiveness. Yet, in the hunt for heretics, these virtues were replaced by paranoia and control. Leaders thought they were defending the light, but they were actually casting a long, dark shadow. Unity became the silence of the grave. Faith became a checklist. Dissent was treated as the ultimate betrayal. History, however, has a way of vindicating the villains. Many ideas once condemned as dangerous are now the pillars of the faith. Some early heretics merely wanted the church to be poor and humble. Others wanted the Bible translated so a farmer could read it for himself. Some just wanted a personal connection to God without a middleman. At the time, these were crimes. Today, they are celebrated as heroic acts of reformation and clarity. The heretic of one century often becomes the saint of the next. This reveals a haunting truth. Fear often mistakes sincerity for rebellion. Most heretics weren't trying to burn the house down. They were trying to find the key to the front door. They loved God so much they were willing to die for the right to know Him truly. Yet, the machinery of fear turned that burning curiosity into a capital offense. Why does this cycle repeat? Because human nature is allergic to uncertainty. We fear what we cannot control. Institutions often prioritize their own survival over the humility of their message. It is always easier to burn a book than to read it. It is always faster to silence a questioner than to sit with the discomfort of the question. Power seeks comfort, but truth usually demands a journey. This story is not only about the past. Even today, people within faith communities can be labeled, excluded, or shamed for asking difficult questions. While formal heresy trials no longer exist, fear-based faith still appears in quieter ways. People may not be imprisoned, but they may be ignored, judged, or pushed aside. The weapons have changed, but the spirit of the hunt remains alive in our whispers and cold shoulders. The danger is not disagreement. The danger is intolerance. Faith does not grow through force or fear. Truth does not need punishment to survive. When belief becomes a crime, faith loses its heart. The history of Christians accused of heresy teaches a powerful lesson. Intolerance within faith communities comes at a high cost. Families were broken, communities were divided, trust was lost, and often, the very people once condemned were later seen as sincere believers who loved God deeply. This history stands as a warning. Faith is strongest when it leaves room for humility, patience, and grace. When belief is guided by compassion instead of control, it reflects its deepest values. But when fear replaces love, everyone pays the price.